Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. Good American Family showrunners break down that shocking finale and the show's Easter eggs. Good American Family is a challenging show based on an equally challenging true crime case. The series depicts an Indiana couple by the names of Christine, Ellen Pompeo, and Michael Barnett, Mark Duplass, adopting a Ukrainian orphan with dwarfism named Natalia, Imogen Faith Reed. Though she initially seems like a wonderful addition to their family, her behavior soon makes the Barnetts suspicious. She may not be telling the full truth about who she is, leading to chaos, confusion, and trauma. It's a challenging thing to depict, but showrunners Katie Robbins and Sarah Sutherland approach the often tragic circumstances with care, showcasing multiple perspectives about what actually happened without sugarcoating the child abuse and cruelty that occurred. Their skill in this particular department should come as no surprise, as Robbins and Sutherland are no strangers to bringing complex family dynamics to the screen, having worked on shows like The Affair and Sunny. Colletter got a chance to speak with Robbins and Sutherland about casting Imogen Faith Reed, the series' most memorable needle drops, the shocking ending, and whether there are any plans to continue the story in a season 2, and much more. So I knew a little bit about this before everyone else did, but I really came into knowing the story the way many other people did, through the HBO documentary. I'm curious how you both stumbled upon it. Borrow BVS. First of all, that's wild, and I really want to talk to you about Lafayette. Hulu first came to me with this idea back in 2020, so a million years ago, and at the time, it was being written about, but it wasn't as pervasive. It was before the HBO documentary. It was before it had gotten quite as much attention as it has now. But there was still a lot, so I dug pretty deep into the research that was available at the time, which was a lot of interviews, a lot of articles, and I found that, as I was going through that, I was really struck by the fact that your understanding of the story really shifted depending on who was being interviewed in the article. And I think that's true in any kind of story, but it felt particularly true with this. So in figuring out how to structure it, I really wanted to hold on to that experience that, if you hear one version of the story, you're convinced that that's the version of the story, but if you hear it from somebody else, it feels different. I wanted to really highlight that and remind us that, when reading any story, you have to pay attention to who's telling it. Sutherland. Katie had created the show, and we've worked together for almost a decade now, and she brought me on. Part of it was I was just so excited about her vision to do the structure the way that it is, to lean into the perspective and the theme that she's trying to tackle. The way that she had planned to do it was just really extraordinary, so I learned about it around the same time. You mentioned you did a lot of research, and I think that really shines through and shows, but I'm curious if it was mostly looking at secondary sources with news stories and newspapers, or did you actually get the chance to speak to anyone who was involved with this case at all? We didn't speak to anybody, but we had an extraordinary research team led by a woman called Riva Mandelbaum, who was there for the trials and who got us access to not just secondary sources, but a lot of primary sources as well. We had access to Facebook messages and text messages and doctors' reports and adoption reports and depositions. I cannot describe the trove of documentation that we had as a way of figuring out how to craft the story. We talked about it, but it was pretty clear immediately that you couldn't do that because you do need this actor to play the adult version from Christine and Michael's perspective. But also, over the course of the season, we span many years, and so you needed somebody who could play all of those ages. And also, frankly, the experience that this actor would have to play is really emotionally demanding. So for all of those reasons, we knew that we needed to cast somebody of age. We did an international casting search for Imogen, and in fact, the series order was contingent on finding somebody to play this role. When we saw Emmy's self-tape, she's an actress who had done some theater and a lot of stand-in work, and a lot of body double work. We were like, this person is the only person who can do this. She blew us away even from those first self-tapes. Sutherland. I love questions from writers. That was such a big challenge because the problem with this story, one of the challenges, is that there's just so much story, and so a lot of the questions were surrounding how to pass the time. And Katie and I like to write with perspective. The way that we like to write really tends to have scenes that are back to back to back because you're following one person and you want to really live with them. And so to both have that experience, but also pass time was a big part of the conversation. I feel really good about where we landed, but yeah, that was a big part of the job. I know that the series was shot before. Obviously, the abuse allegations came out against the man's family, but I did notice that we don't see either Cynthia or Antoine in those ending scenes. I'm curious if the allegations changed the editing of that ending at all, or if it was always meant to be what we saw in that final. The series was done before that came out, as you said, and I think that we had a sense of some of the complications between Natalia and the man's family at a certain point. We wanted to end the series where we do in a general sense, but we made some adjustments along the way in terms of that story. I'm glad that you guys didn't shy away from it, honestly, because I feel like it's hard to balance that story with the things that you find out afterward. You tackled it in a really respectful way that really worked. There is obviously a lot more story to tell that we've since found out. I'm curious if you would ever consider doing a season 2, or if this is strictly a limited series in your mind. That's not something that we're talking about. I think that this show very intentionally ends where it does, because it speaks to the themes that we're trying to explore in the show. I wanted to talk about one moment in the ending, because we have Jacob sort of apologizing. And he's really the only one who does take responsibility, even though he was a child, and all this was happening to him too, which I found really heartbreaking, but also impactful. I'm curious if you can talk about writing that moment, because it felt really moving and powerful to me. ROBBIS. Oh, that's really nice to hear. You know, I think that one of the things that the show is kind of grappling with is family trauma, and the way that trauma from one generation carries through to the next, and is it possible to stop that? Are there ways to kind of have one generation say, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore, I need to find a new path? The show has a lot of darkness in it, but we were constantly looking for places to find a little bit of hope, and with generations looking to find more empathy for other people, and to move through the world with empathy and curiosity. That is the thing that I think gives us the most hope for the future of the world. And so finding that little moment between the two of them felt like a way of kind of conveying that. ROBVINS. Sarah and I both write to music, so it's always a really important part of the process, even from the point where, in the first outline that I wrote of the pilot, I was adding in needle drops. One of the things that felt really important about the needle drops that we use is that I wanted them to be really emotionally accessible, familiar kinds of things that these characters might listen to feel like themselves. It was these big, emotional ballads or pop songs, and the music sort of shifts depending on whose perspective we're in. But I just wanted it to feel really American and really familiar, but not too familiar that it would feel overly so. We had a tremendous amount of fun picking them. Shiloh, which becomes a bit of an anthem. Neil Diamond's Shiloh is probably the one that sticks out a lot. And then there's a little Robin that we get later on in the season that I think is another one that really felt really right. I think that props are the things that we touch and interact with everywhere we go and make our lives feel real. So I'm very obsessive about props feeling as grounded and specific in time and place as they can be, in Natalia's apartment or in the house. In Christine's daycare, wanting to make sure that the stuff that is in there is very specific to what a daycare setup for neurodivergent kids would have, wanting to make sure that the posters in Jacob's room feel grounded, and what a science prodigy would be engaging with. I am props obsessive, but we had an extraordinary team of designers. our props master, and our production designer, and our costume designer, who, that is their job, to be that specific. I love them because I can nerd out with them about making sure that everything feels as real and grounded as possible.